Welcome to Kevin Makes Cool Things. I'm Kevin, and these are Climb's magic bells from the Overlord anime. These appear in Season 2, when Climb is raiding the Eight Fingers brothel. Climb isn't my favorite character, but when he looks up at you with those puppy dog eyes, you can kinda see why Princess Renner fell for him. My reason for making this actually has nothing to do with Climb. I try to make things from series I enjoy, and I really like Overlord. There's a lot of items that I want to try 3D printing, but doing something big like a runecraft bow would take a lot of work. I generally try to look for smaller things, like these bells or the horn of the Goblin General. Before I explain the design, I want to warn you that this is actually a really old project. I finished the models for this back in March of 2021, back when I was using only OpenSCAD. While this definitely isn't a simple project for OpenSCAD, it wasn't as absurd as some of the other ones I've done. For the round bell, the bell of detect secret doors, I made this using some spheres and cylinders which I scaled to elongate. I used difference and intersect to cut in this pattern, which gave me the general shape of the bell and the details. For the square bell, the bell of open locks, I used a for loop, but not the overly complicated ones you've seen in my past videos. There were no sine functions required to make this. Basically, I made one side of this, and then used a for loop to create and rotate the other sides into place. For the triangular bell, the bell of remove trap, I started by making a pyramid. There were some really clever ways to do this, but I was lazy and did none of them. I started by making 4 spheres, which I think had a diameter of 1 mm, and positioned them at the vertices. Then I used a hull to create my pyramid. This was really fast and meant I could easily tweak the height. Then I used a for loop to create the sides, just like I did on the other bell. The only difference was that in this case, some of the details were recessed into the face, so I had to add the gem and then use a difference to cut in those details. Later, I made this piece on the top in a separate method, and added it to each bell. I bought this strap before finishing the designs, and made sure it would fit perfectly in that top piece. Unfortunately, the fit was a little too snug after printing, but I'll talk more about that later. I bought these brass bells before doing any of the designs. I created a cavity in these 2 bells which perfectly fit one of the brass ones. I knew that putting a bell in such a tight space might ruin the sound, which is exactly what ended up happening, but I figured it was worth a try. I'm mainly going for visuals on this project, so having it sound nice quite literally falls in the bells and whistles category for me. This bell is smaller than the other 2, and definitely couldn't fit a brass bell inside of it. I'll talk more about my plans for it later. Once these were printed, I went through my normal progression of hand sanding, applying wood filler, and then doing more sanding. The recessed details were especially difficult to reach, so it is rough in some areas. Recently, I've been using a dremel tool to do an initial round of sanding, and it's made a huge difference. It's not that I didn't want to use a dremel tool in this project, I was just living in a small apartment with carpeting. I couldn't use power tools, spray-on primer, or anything else which could make a mess. It's also one of the reasons I've gravitated towards smaller projects in past, because I had no place to build or store the larger ones. I have since moved, which is why you see me using more tools and materials. That move is also the reason this project was delayed so much. The triangular bell needed wires to attach the pieces together. In the anime, they make this look like it's a single ring, but that didn't make much sense to me. I decided to go with this design because I thought it looked more fitting. I got this to work by bending the wire in the lower portion and using 2-part epoxy to glue on the top. I primed this with white acrylic paint and then added the gold. I use folk art metallic paints for a lot of my projects. They're only a couple of bucks each and they do a great job. There might be better paints out there, but given how inexpensive and widely available this brand is, I can't see looking for alternatives in the near future. After nearly finishing this project, I paused it so I could move. And then I got distracted by other things, like making stuff from solo leveling. I eventually got back into this and wrapped it up pretty quickly. I quickly touched up the gold and silver paint. I also repainted the gems on these 2 bells. When I first painted them, I was a little sloppy. I've since invested a whopping $8 in a set of smaller brushes, which have been great for doing details. I really regret not getting them sooner. I applied a couple of coats of spray-on matte sealer to finish out this part of the project. I used superglue to attach the straps. The fit here was a little more snug than I intended, and I had to cheat a little. I found pushing on them with a toothpick worked pretty well, but they're still just barely in there. It's fine for just handling it normally, but I'm not going to be swinging these around with the straps anytime soon. I actually purchased jingle bells to go inside of all of these, figuring that they were less authentic but would probably work better than the brass bells I originally purchased. Unfortunately, I misplaced them during the move, so I went with the original brass ones on these two, and the results are pretty much what you'd expect. Here's one of the bells normally. Here it is inside of my 3D printed bell. It's not a big issue for me either way. I could have bought smaller brass bells and tried to make this work, but I just couldn't be bothered. I wanted this to make noise because I thought it would be cool, but I'm not particularly picky about the sound. For the triangular bell, I used a bit of wire to attach this little jingle bell to the inside. I salvaged this from an old Christmas ornament, and while it doesn't sound like much, it makes me happy knowing it's in there. And that was it. It was a fun project, and I'm glad I finally finished it. I really enjoy finishing old projects because it reminds me how far I've come. When I designed this, it was a big project, and I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to handle it within a single video. Now that I'm regularly making more complicated projects and using better tools and materials, this seemed like a breeze. Next month, I will hopefully be releasing the Kamish daggers. I've been having issues with my 3D printer, which I mentioned last month, and I haven't been able to print any of my newer designs. If you enjoyed this, then please give it a like so YouTube's algorithm will recommend this to more people. If you want to support the channel and see my other projects, then please subscribe.